The chamber was big enough to hold a small city. Its walls were made of something that looked like glass, but was harder than any metal humans had ever found. The light inside came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was soft and cold and made everything look clean, like the inside of a place that had never known dirt or war or hunger. 11 seats sat in a raised circle at the center. Each seat belonged to a civilization. Each civilization believed it was important. Most of them were right, but not for the reasons they thought. The chamber was called the Hall of Accord. It sat aboard Nexus Station, which floated at the gravitational midpoint of the known galaxy like a jewel hung on nothing. Every major species had helped build it 200 years ago, when the idea of peace still felt new and worth celebrating. Back then, it had been a symbol. Now it was just a building where powerful people told other people what they could and could not do. Imsora sat in the upper gallery. She had been sitting there for 3 hours. She was a small woman with a calm face and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a gray diplomatic uniform with no markings, which was the kind of uniform people wore when they wanted to be forgotten. She had a small recording device hidden in the collar, but she did not need it. She remembered everything. Below her, the 11 ambassadors were finishing their speeches. They had been talking for most of the morning. They used long words and formal phrases, but what they were saying was simple. They were saying that humanity was a problem. They had been saying it for years in private. Today they were saying it in public, which meant they had already made their decision and were now just performing the reasons for it. Ambassador Velrath spoke last. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 fingers on each hand. His species, the Veth, had been part of the council since the very beginning. He spoke slowly, like a man who had practiced this speech many times and wanted to make sure every word landed the way he intended. He said that humanity had been given many chances. He said that humans had refused to reduce their weapons when asked. He said they had expanded into star systems without council approval. He said their behavior was unpredictable and their culture was aggressive, and that the peace of the galaxy could not be maintained, while humanity continued to act as though the rules did not apply to them. He said the council had no choice. The vote was 9-2. The 2 who voted against were Elder Kas, a wide, slow-moving creature from a water world called Drem, and a small ambassador from a species so minor that most of the other council members could not remember her name. Neither of them said anything after the vote. Elder Kas looked at the floor. The small ambassador looked at her hands. The decree was read aloud by a machine voice that echoed off the glass walls. Earth and all human-settled worlds were to be removed from the galactic community permanently. Trade routes to human space would be closed. Communication relays connecting humanity to the rest of the galaxy would be shut down and physically dismantled. Any species caught trading with, communicating with, or assisting humanity in any form would face immediate economic sanctions and possible removal of their own council membership. Humanity was to be relocated, peacefully if possible and forcefully if necessary, to a region of space known as the Outer Veil, a stretch of dead stars and gravitational dead zones on the far edge of the mapped galaxy. The decree used the word banishment. It also used the word permanent. Imsora watched all of it. She watched Velrath fold his long hands together after the vote like a man completing a task he had been looking forward to. She watched Elder Kas sit very still and stare at nothing. She watched the small ambassador quietly leave the chamber before the applause finished. Then Imsora stood up, smoothed her gray uniform, and walked out of the gallery without looking back. She found a quiet corridor 3 levels below the chamber and stood next to a water recycler and sent a full transmission to Earth. The message was encrypted in a format that looked like routine maintenance data. It contained everything: the speeches, the vote count, the exact language of the decree, and her own brief note at the end. The note said, "They did it, proceed." On Earth, the news arrived at different times in different places. It hit the public feeds in the early morning in most of Asia and in the middle of the night in the Americas. People woke up to it or stayed up watching it. Protests started within an hour in a dozen cities. Politicians appeared on screens looking angry or frightened or both. Commentators talked over each other. A crowd gathered outside the United Nations building in New York and another outside the Global Assembly Hall in Nairobi and another in the streets of Jakarta. And they all said roughly the same things, which were versions of how dare they and what do we do now. In a building beneath Seoul, there were no protests. It was not the kind of place where people protested. It was underground, reinforced, lit by practical lights, and filled with people who had spent the last 2 years quietly preparing for exactly this moment. Admiral Kang Duan sat at the head of a long table. He was not a large man, but he had a stillness about him that made people pay attention when he moved. He had short black hair going gray at the sides, and a habit of keeping his hands flat on the table when he was thinking. He had watched the entire vote on a screen built into the wall. When it ended, he reached over and turned it off himself. The room was quiet for a moment. Ha Yurai sat 2 seats down from him. She was the chief engineer of what the council did not know existed yet. She had a tablet in her hand and dark circles under her eyes from working too many nights in a row, and she was already pulling up star charts before anyone spoke. Byun Teo leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. He commanded the Vanguard Wing, which was currently sitting in a construction bay in the outer asteroid belt looking nothing like a military force yet. He was chewing on the end of a pen. Kang Duan looked around the table. Then he said, simply and without any particular emotion, that this was good news. He said they no longer needed to ask anyone for anything. He said the council had handed them an excuse to do everything they had already been planning to do, and that starting today, they would do it without apology and without delay. Ha Yurai looked up from her tablet. On it was a star map of the outer veil, already covered in markings and notes and survey data. She had been building that map for 14 months. She said the council had no idea what was actually out there. Kang Duan said he knew. Then he told everyone to get to work. 18 months passed, and the galaxy forgot about humanity almost completely. It was not hard to forget. The council had other things to worry about. The Veth and the Orani were fighting over a mineral-rich moon in the middle systems. 2 smaller species had merged their governments and were now demanding a second seat at the council table, which nobody wanted to give them. Trade disputes, border skirmishes, old grudges dressed up as new political arguments. The galaxy was full of noise, and humanity had gone quiet, which made it very easy to stop thinking about them. Velrath gave a speech 3 months after the banishment in which he said the decision had already proven to be correct. He pointed to the reduction in border incidents and the improvement in trade flow along the central routes as evidence that removing humanity had been the right move. He was applauded. He looked satisfied. He did not look at Elder Koss, who sat in his seat and said nothing. Elder Koss had started asking questions about the outer veil shortly after the vote. He had asked the council's cartography division for updated surveys of the region. He was told the surveys were current. He asked when the last active scan had been done. There was a long pause before anyone answered, and when they did, the answer was 40 years ago. He asked why no new surveys had been ordered before sending humanity there. Nobody had a good answer for that either. He wrote a formal request for a new survey mission. The request was approved, logged, and then quietly delayed due to budget considerations. It was still being delayed when the 18 months ended. Nobody told Koss anything. Nobody thought there was anything to tell. In the outer veil, everything was being told to everybody all at once. Wu Gichan was 23 years old and had grown up in Incheon in a small apartment 2 blocks from the sea. He had joined the engineering corps because his older brother had, and because it paid better than most things available to a young man with no family connections and a talent for fixing machines. He had not expected, at 23, to be standing on the observation deck of a colony carrier, the size of a small mountain, watching the stars of the outer veil go past like scattered salt on a black table. He had also not expected what the outer veil actually looked like from the inside. The Council's maps showed it as gray, empty sectors drawn with no names and no markings except the occasional notation for a gravitational hazard or a dead star. It looked, on paper, like the galaxy's trash heap, a place to put things that nobody wanted anymore. What it actually was something else entirely. The gravitational anomalies the Council had mapped as hazards turned out to be the remains of an ancient civilization's infrastructure. Not ruins exactly, more like bones. Enormous curved structures drifting in slow orbits around dead stars, made of materials that no scanner in the Council's inventory could properly classify. Some were hollow. Some were not. Some appeared to have been deliberately placed, arranged in patterns that had no name yet because no one alive had ever seen them before. The mineral density in the veil was extraordinary. Veins of rare elements ran through asteroid clusters so thick that a single cluster could supply a mid-sized civilization's industrial needs for a generation. The Council's instruments had read the region as barren because they had been calibrated for the kinds of deposits found in the central systems. Human instruments had been built to different tolerances, designed to search deeper and measure more broadly. They read the veil the way a good doctor reads a patient, not just for what was visible, but for what was underneath. HFY had not slept more than 5 hours at a stretch in 8 months. She did not complain about this. She did not appear to notice it. She moved through the engineering bays of the primary research station like she lived inside the work itself, pulling fragments of ancient technology from storage units and laying them out on wide tables and staring at them until something made sense. The fold compression drive had come from one of those fragments. It had taken her team 4 months to understand what they were looking at, another 2 to build a working model small enough to test. The test had been done in secret, in a dead-end corner of the veil with only 3 ships present. When it worked, nobody cheered. They all stood in silence for almost a full minute, staring at the readings on their screens. Then one of the younger engineers started crying, quietly, and nobody made anything of it. A fold compression drive did not move a ship from one place to another. It folded space so that 2 points touched, and the ship simply stepped through. It was not faster than light travel. It was the elimination of the concept of distance entirely. A ship using the drive could go from one end of the known galaxy to the other in the time it took to brew a cup of coffee. The Council's fastest ships took 3 weeks to cross the same distance. HFY wrote up her findings in a technical report that was calm, precise, and completely without drama. She sent it to Admiral Kang Duwan with a short note at the bottom that said the 2nd and 3rd generation prototypes were already in development, and that she expected full fleet-scale installation within 6 months. Duwan read the report twice. Then he went to his private office, which was very small and had a single viewport looking out at a cluster of ancient structures drifting in the dark, and he sat alone for 10 minutes. Nobody knew what he thought about during those 10 minutes. When he came out, he called a senior staff meeting and told everyone to accelerate every timeline by 30%. Bayun-Teo had spent those same 18 months turning a collection of pilots and soldiers into something new. He had done it the way the Veil demanded, not by drilling them in open space combat, which was the Council's way, but by running them through the magnetic storms and gravity pockets of the Veil itself every single day. His pilots learned to fly the way fish learn to swim in rough water. They stopped fighting the environment and started using it. They developed instincts that no textbook could teach, because no textbook had ever been written for conditions like these. By the end of the 18th month, T.O. could run 60 ships through a gravitational corridor in total radio silence with 0 collisions. He could do it at night, in a storm, at full speed. He told his pilots often that their greatest advantage was not their ships or their weapons. Their greatest advantage was that Their enemy had never operated in these conditions and never would understand them, while his people had lived in them long enough that the Veil felt like home. Wu Gi-chan, watching all of this from the ground level of a civilization rebuilding itself in the dark, felt something he could not quite name. It was not pride exactly, though there was some of that. It was more like the feeling of watching a long, slow fire finally reach the thing it had been building toward all along. He wrote letters home. He described the stars, the structures, the work. He did not describe the weapons testing or the drive trials, but in every letter, without ever saying it directly, he tried to communicate what it felt like to be part of something that the rest of the galaxy had no idea was happening. Nobody was watching, nobody was listening. Which was, of course, exactly the point. The freighter was called the Seventh Dawn, and it was dying. It had been caught in a fringe storm 3 days earlier, one of the sudden electromagnetic surges that rolled through the outer edge of mapped Council space with almost no warning. The storm had knocked out 2 of its 3 engine cores, shredded its long-range communications array, and sent it drifting at a slow angle toward the one region of space that every Council navigation chart marked in red with the simple word, avoid. There were 11 crew members aboard. 2 were injured. All of them were hungry and cold because the heating systems had been running on backup power for 30 hours and backup power only went so far. The captain was a Veth woman named Doral. She had been flying cargo routes for 20 years, and she had never been afraid of space in the way that some captains were, but she was afraid now. Not because of the cold or the dark, but because she had been watching the outer veil grow slowly larger in her forward viewport for 3 days, and she did not know what would happen when they crossed the boundary. The charts said nothing lived there. The charts said it was empty. But the charts were 40 years old, and Doral was smart enough to know that 40 years was a long time. When the human patrol vessel appeared off her port side, she thought for 1/2 second that she was hallucinating. It was a mid-sized ship, gray-black, with a design she did not recognize from any database she had ever used. It moved without the hum that most Council drives produced. It was just there, suddenly, the way a stone is just there when you step on it in the dark. A voice came over the open channel. It spoke in perfect galactic standard, which was the trade language of the Council, with a very slight accent that Doral could not identify. The voice said, "Seventh Dawn, this is the escort vessel Haran. You have entered the outer veil, we saw you coming. Your engine signature has been tracked for about 6 hours. We are not going to hurt you. Please respond." Doral responded. She did not have much of a choice. What happened next was not what she expected. She had expected, at worst, to be taken prisoner. At best, to be turned around and pushed back toward Council space. She had not expected to be welcomed. The Haran matched speed with the Seventh Dawn and held position, while 2 human engineers in sealed suits crossed over and began repairs on the damaged engine cores. They worked quickly and without any fuss, communicating with each other in Korean, which Doral's translator rendered as a series of technical phrases and the occasional short joke. One of them patched the heating system first, without being asked, and the warmth that came back through the Seventh Dawn made 2 of Doral's crew members visibly relax for the first time in days. The injured crew members were brought aboard the Haran and treated in a medical bay that Doral, when she saw it, quietly noted was better equipped than most Council station clinics she had used. She did not say this out loud. They were on the Haran for 16 hours. During that time they were fed real food, hot, well-made, carefully prepared. They were given clean clothes and places to sleep. Nobody interrogated them. Nobody threatened them. The human crew was polite, professional, and almost casually warm in the way that felt genuine rather than performed. They were also shown things. Not everything. Not the drive research or the weapon systems or the full scope of what existed deeper in the veil. But enough. Doral was walked past a viewport that looked out at a construction platform where 3 ships were being assembled that were unlike anything she had ever seen in terms of scale. She was shown an energy readout on an open screen that she was clearly meant to see, which showed power generation numbers that did not fit any civilization she knew of. She was given a brief tour of the Haran itself, which moved and responded with a smoothness that told her the engineering beneath it was far ahead of what it appeared on the outside. None of it was accidental, she understood that. Every single thing she was allowed to see had been decided in advance. She was being shown a message. She just had to read it. When the 7th dawn was repaired, Doral's crew was returned to their ship with full fuel tanks, a repaired communications array, and a case of food supplies for the journey home. At the airlock, a human officer handed her a sealed data package and passed on a verbal message. The verbal message was from Admiral Kang Duwan. It said, "Humanity holds no grudge. We have been busy. When you are ready to talk, you know where to find us." Doral carried the data package back to Council space and delivered it in person to the nearest Council relay station, which forwarded it to Nexus Station within the hour. She also filed a full incident report, which was required, and in which she wrote everything she had seen and heard as accurately as she could. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. The plain facts were enough. The data package contained detailed scans of 12 human stations now operating in the outer veil. It contained energy output readings. It contained a short, politely formatted technical paper, written with careful academic language, full citations, and a modest abstract that described, in theoretical terms only, a method of spatial compression that could reduce travel time across the galaxy from weeks to hours. The paper was 12 pages long. By the 3rd page, the Council's top physicists, when they read it, would begin to feel a cold, specific kind of fear, not because they could disprove it, because they could not. The Council chamber on Nexus Station did not erupt immediately. It took about 4 hours after the data package arrived for enough members to read enough of it to understand what they were looking at. Then it erupted. Velrath was the loudest. He said the data was fabricated. He said it was a threat dressed up as diplomacy. He said humanity was using the standard tactics of an aggressive species, provocation followed by the offer of conversation, designed to make the other party feel weak. He said the Council should respond with strength and clarity. He proposed a military expedition, a show of force, 40 warships crossing into the outer veil to assess and, if necessary, destroy key human installations as a warning. 7 Council members voted in favor. Elder Koss voted against. Then he stood up from his seat, which was unusual because he almost never stood during sessions. He looked at Velrath for a long moment without saying anything. Then he looked at the data package summary displayed on the chamber's central screen. Then he said, quietly enough that people had to stop talking to hear him, that he wanted the record to show he had voted against this expedition, and that he believed the Council was about to make the worst decision it had ever made. Then he walked out. The chamber was quiet for a moment after he left. Then the talking started again. I am Sora, still deep in Council territory under a false name and a false job, and a face that almost nobody looked at twice. Watched all of it from a public gallery feed on a screen in a small room she rented by the week. She typed a single short message and sent it on a carrier wave buried inside routine network traffic. The message said, "They're sending 40 ships, start the clock." In the outer veil, Admiral Kang Duwan received the message in the early morning watch cycle. He read it once. He handed it to Bayan Tio, who read it and then smiled the kind of smile that made people near him want to take a small step backward. Duwan told him to get the fleet ready. Tio said it had been ready for 2 months. The Council Armada crossed into the outer veil on a Tuesday, which meant nothing to the universe, but was the kind of detail that Wu Gichan would remember for the rest of his life. He was at his station aboard the carrier Dawson when the long-range sensors picked up the 40 incoming ships. He watched the contacts appear on the display one by one, like lights being turned on in a dark house. He had been awake for 6 hours already and had another 6 to go. He poured the last of his coffee into a cup, watched the screen, and said nothing. The rest of the bridge crew said nothing either. They had known this was coming. Admiral Kang Duwan had briefed all senior staff 48 hours earlier in a room with no recording devices, speaking in the flat, practical tone he used when something important needed to be understood rather than celebrated. He had told them what was coming, what they were going to do about it, and what he needed from each of them. The briefing had taken 20 minutes. There were no questions at the end, because he had covered everything. The Council fleet moved in a tight formation. 40 ships, arranged in a standard Council assault configuration, 2 lead dreadnoughts at the front, flanked by cruisers, with a screen of smaller escort vessels spread wide to cover approaches. It was a good formation by Council standards. It communicated confidence. It was designed to look unstoppable. Bayan Tio watched it approach on his tactical screen and said out loud, to nobody in particular, that the rear screen was uneven. He pointed to the upper right quadrant of the formation, where one of the escort vessels was running slightly out of position, tucked a little too far back, and a little too far to one side to fit the standard pattern. That was not an escort vessel. It was a scout ship running silent, positioned to observe and transmit rather than fight. It was the kind of move a careful commander made when he wanted a second set of eyes that he thought the other side would not see. Tio told his communications officer to open a broad channel frequency. Then he leaned into it and spoke with the kind of calm that came not from indifference but from complete preparation. He told the Council fleet that they had been tracked since crossing the Veil boundary. He gave them the exact ship count. He told them about the scout hiding in the rear. He said hello to it by name, using the vessel classification code visible on its hull signature, which he had been reading for the past 3 hours. The Council fleet went quiet for 40 seconds. Then Velrath's voice came through on the command channel. It was controlled, but something underneath it was not. He identified himself, stated his authority under Council decree, and ordered all human vessels to stand down and withdraw from the vicinity of their stations while the Armada conducted its assessment. There was a pause on the human side, not a hesitation, a pause, deliberate and measured like a breath before a sentence. Then Kang Duwan's voice came through. He said he understood. He said he had no problem with assessment. He said they were welcome to look at whatever they wanted to look at. He asked only that they proceed calmly because this was, after all, a conversation between civilizations, and conversations went better when everyone was calm. Then he said that if Velrath would check his tactical display, he might notice something worth seeing. Velrath checked his tactical display. The Council formation had spent the last 12 minutes executing a standard surrounding maneuver on the nearest human station, a long, practiced arc of ships designed to cut off approach vectors and establish a dominant perimeter. It was something Council fleets had drilled hundreds of times. It took 12 minutes because the fleet was large and careful and methodical. The maneuver was nearly complete. Around the Council fleet, on every side, above and below and to every flank, 60 human ships had appeared. They had not traveled to those positions. They had simply arrived there. No approach, no visible transit. One moment the space around the Council Armada was empty and the next it was not. The human ships sat in place without moving, without weapons hot, without any aggressive signal whatsoever. Just present, just there. In the same way that walls are there. The fold compression drive left no signature that Council sensors could read. There was no flash, no energy spike, no shockwave. Just absence and then presence. It was the single most disorienting thing that any of Velrath's bridge crew had ever experienced, and several of them made sounds that were later not included in the official record. Kang Duwan waited a full minute before speaking again. He gave them the time because he wanted them to understand exactly what they were looking at. He wanted the reality of it to settle fully before he said anything, because the words mattered less than the comprehension, and the comprehension needed a moment. Then he spoke. He said that he knew why they had come. He said humanity understood, and he meant that word without any edge to it, that when a civilization grew suddenly in a region that others had assumed was empty, it was natural and reasonable to want to know what was happening. He said he bore no ill will toward any ship in that formation. He said there were fathers and daughters and long-service officers in those crews who had no personal stake in the politics that brought them here, and he respected that. He said, "You came to see if we were a threat. We are not to anyone who leaves us in peace, but I want you to look at your tactical display right now, and I want you to understand something. We let you try to surround us so you could see what surrounding actually looks like." Nobody fired a weapon. Nobody moved. Velrath sat in his command chair and looked at the screen in front of him and did not speak for a very long time. His fleet was boxed, completely and perfectly and without a single hostile action on the human side. Every approach vector, every retreat corridor, every gap in the formation, all of it covered. Not approximately. Exactly. His tactical officer said, very quietly, that the human positioning was precise to within 11 meters across all 60 ships. She said this was not possible with conventional drives and conventional coordination. She said her instruments showed no evidence of how the ships had arrived, only that they had. She looked at her commander and waited. Velrath did not respond to her. Wu Gi-chan, at his station aboard the Dawson, watched the tactical overlay in silence. He had not been in the briefing that explained every detail of the plan, but he had understood the shape of it, and now he was watching it happen exactly the way Duwan had said it would. Around him, the bridge crew was professionally quiet. Nobody cheered. Nobody made a show of the moment. They had been trained by people who understood that the most powerful statements were the ones that did not need to be underlined. He thought about his family in Incheon. He thought about the night the Banishment Decree had come through and his mother had cried in the kitchen with the news screen on and the sound turned low, as if turning it down made it less real. He thought about the crossing to the Vale, the months of work, the cold and the strange beauty of the ancient structures drifting outside his viewport. He did not feel anger looking at those 40 council ships. He had expected to. Instead, he felt something that he later tried to describe in a letter home and found he could not find the exact words for. It was something like the feeling of a long argument finally ending, not with shouting, with silence. The council fleet began to withdraw 40 minutes later. It moved slowly, in the careful way of something that did not want to turn its back too quickly. 60 human ships maintained their positions and watched it go, without pursuit, without comment. When the last council ship crossed back out of the Vale boundary, Bayan Tio leaned back in his seat and looked at the empty space they had left behind. He said it had been a good day. Nobody disagreed. 3 months after the day in the Vale, I.M. Sora walked through the front entrance of Nexus Station without a disguise. She wore a clean white jacket with a small blue pin on the lapel, the new emblem of the Outer Vale Compact, which had been designed the previous month by a committee that spent 2 hours arguing about colors and 10 minutes agreeing on the shape. She carried a single document case and nothing else. She did not hurry. She walked the way a person walks when they have arrived exactly where they intended to be. She had spent 2 years on Nexus Station under a false name, working a minor administrative job in the communications relay department, watching the council from the inside. She had filed hundreds of reports. She had sat in gallery seats during closed sessions that the public was not supposed to know about. She had eaten meals in staff cafeterias and listened to council employees talk about their work the way people everywhere talk about their work, with a mix of pride and frustration, and the particular kind of tiredness that comes from doing the same thing for a long time. She knew this station the way she knew her own apartment. Every corridor, every shift change, every face. When she entered the Hall of Accord, the chamber was in session. She had timed it that way. The 11 seats were occupied. Various bureaucratic matters were being discussed in the slow, formal way of institutions that had been operating long enough to confuse process with purpose. 2 ambassadors were arguing about a trade tariff. A third was reading something on a tablet under the table, which was not allowed but happened constantly. Sora walked to the central dais, the raised circular platform at the room's heart where formal declarations were made, and placed her document case on it. A chamber attendant moved toward her immediately, ready to ask her what she thought she was doing. She showed him her credentials. He stopped. She opened the case and placed a single bound document on the dais. Then she stood back and waited. The 2 ambassadors had stopped arguing. The one reading the tablet had put it away. All 11 seats were watching her now. She said her name clearly and her title, Special Envoy of the Outer Veil Compact, and she said that she was not there to negotiate, not there to apologize, and not there to ask for anything. She said she was there to extend an invitation, which was a different thing, and that the invitation was not only for the Council but for any civilization in the galaxy that wished to accept it. The document she had placed on the dais was the founding charter of the Outer Veil Compact. She summarized it briefly. The compact was an open coalition. Any species could join, regardless of size, military capacity, or political history. There were no mandatory disarmament clauses. There were no cultural compliance requirements. There were no applications, no probationary periods, no loyalty tests. Members had full and equal access to Veil resources, Veil technology, and Veil infrastructure. In return, they agreed to 3 things. Do not attack other Compact members. Do not allow your territory to be used to attack Compact members, and resolve disputes through direct conversation before any other means. That was the entire charter. It fit on 4 pages. Sora said that the document was being transmitted simultaneously to every registered government in the known galaxy, which was true. It had gone out 6 minutes before she walked into the chamber, timed so that no one could stop it. Then she picked up her empty document case and walked back out of the Hall of Accord, through the front entrance of Nexus Station, and onto a shuttle that took her to a waiting human ship. She slept for 11 hours on the trip back to the Veil. The response came faster than almost anyone expected, except for Kang Duwan, who had expected it exactly. 6 minor species signed within the first week. They were civilizations that the Council had tolerated rather than respected, small governments with no military weight, assigned minor trade roles, never given real seats at real tables. They signed because the offer was real, and the terms were clear, and the Veil's resource access alone was worth more than anything the Council had offered them in the last 50 years. 2 more species joined in the second week, then a 9th, then 3 more in the same month, including a mid-sized civilization that had been a Council member for 30 years and had spent most of that time being outvoted on matters that directly affected it. Elder Koss submitted his resignation from the Galactic Council of 14 days after Sora's appearance in the Hall of Accord. His resignation letter was 2 sentences long. The first sentence said that he had disagreed with the Council's direction for some time, and that recent events had confirmed his concerns. The second sentence said he wished the remaining members well. He filed an application for Compact membership on behalf of his people the following morning. The application was reviewed in the afternoon and approved without conditions by evening. The turnaround time was so fast that it became a small joke among the Compact staff, which was still very small at that point and working out of 3 prefab buildings on Veil Station Prime. HFY was not involved in any of the political work. She was busy. The second-generation fold drive was ready for full fleet installation, and she had 3 research threads running in parallel on the ancient veil structures that she was not willing to slow down for anything short of an actual emergency. She attended one compact founding meeting, contributed exactly one opinion on infrastructure sharing policy, and then went back to her lab. Bayun-Teo spent the 3 months running new joint exercises with the military units of the first compact members. It was careful work because the other species had never trained in the Veil, and their pilots were not used to the conditions. He was patient with them, which surprised people who knew him mostly by reputation. He said that a coalition force that could not function together was not a force at all, and that patience now was efficiency later. Wu Gi-chan was promoted during the 3rd month, not to anything dramatic, a senior engineering position on the Dawson, with a small increase in quarters size and a new set of responsibilities that kept him busy in exactly the way he preferred. He wrote a letter home the night of his promotion, a longer one than usual. He tried to describe what the Veil looked like now, with ships from 9 different civilizations coming and going from the station, with construction platforms running day and night, with the ancient structures in the distance slowly giving up their secrets to HFY's teams. He said it felt different from how he had expected victory to feel. He had thought it would feel loud. It felt quiet instead, solid, like something built to last. On the evening that the 10th compact member signed, Admiral Kang Duan stood at the viewport of his flagship. The ship was docked at Veil Station Prime, and through the viewport he could see the long curve of the station's main bay, where ships from 7 different civilizations were berthed in rows. Some were loading cargo. Some were being repaired. Some were just there, present, part of something that had not existed 2 years ago and now would not stop existing. HFY came to stand beside him. She had a cup of coffee in one hand and her tablet in the other, and the tablet still had 3 open research files on it even now, at this hour, at this moment. She said that the council had called it a banishment. He said he knew. She said it was the best thing they had ever done for humanity. He did not answer right away. He looked at the ships, and the people moving between them and the stars beyond the station's outer edge, and the particular dark of the Veil, which he had learned over 2 years, was not really dark at all if you knew how to look at it. Then he said he agreed. Outside, a fold compression test run was in progress. The ripple it sent through local space was visible for just a moment from the viewport, a brief shimmer in the stars, like a stone dropped in still water. Then the space settled again and the stars were back, steady and unchanged and infinite. The Council of 11 still existed. It still met on Nexus Station and made its decisions and issued its decrees. But the galaxy it was making decisions about was smaller now, and getting smaller, and the part of it that was growing was somewhere else entirely. Humanity had not come back to the galaxy. The galaxy had come to them. And the door, unlike the one that had been slammed in their faces 2 years ago, was open to anyone who wanted to walk through it.